Welcome to Hidden SQuiDZ Gaming. Today we're going to talk about things I personally, I don't, some of you may be okay with the things I mentioned, but I think for the most part there's going to be these 5 things I would like to see changed in Darkest Dungeon. Whether it would be, they obviously wouldn't come back and patch this, but if I was to make the game now and after playing it, or some things, once again, these are kind of like, this is going to be a weird combination of what I would want with Darkest Dungeon 2, and kind of what I also think with how this game was designed, I would fix this one as well. First off, we're going to talk about the bosses. Not that I have a problem with the bosses individually, but I do believe it gets a little repetitive that you fight the same boss 3 times. I will argue this in favor of fighting the boss 3 times though. Honestly, once you get to the champion, you kind of figure out whether your composition is bad or good against that boss. But it's still kind of boring, and it feels kind of, it's not cheap, but when you get there, you take in the same party you used the last 2 times, you go, oh, this one didn't work, I'll just try something different. It's not necessarily like it's a new challenge, it's just you didn't have a good party, and once the boss gets enough accuracy, dodge, and HP, you realize your composition wasn't the greatest, but I don't think it really offers very much. Now, if you're asking how would I fix that, I wouldn't ask the designers to make 24 bosses. That's insane. It'd become very, very bland probably. The designs would be bad. The lore behind them would be bad. They'd be so forgettable. You know, more is not always better. I'm not at all advocating for that. This is what I would do if I was the designers. To potentially actually make the bosses more memorable, and I think I mentioned it a little bit in Darkest Dungeon 2, is have the boss maybe do a random encounter, and until you get them down to like maybe a third, 2/3 of their HP down there, not very far, just enough to get a glimpse, they just back out. So you maybe get a random encounter in the apprentice level, then in veteran, because maybe if we're apprentice, you don't even need to fight a boss, you just literally run into it once, and then once you get up to veteran, the veteran mission is, let's say, activating something to get to the boss. So I don't know, for the hag, maybe you have to like steal her ladle or something. I don't know, it doesn't make a lot of sense right now. But something that kind of theoretically builds up, or you connect it to the ancestor. The ancestor tells you, oh, you need to go here, activate this, or ruin this. And then the hag's going to be really mad at you, and she's going to come after you. So something like that, maybe something to like entice the boss to actually come out of hiding and come get you, where you need something to go to the boss to finally defeat it. Or, you know, the boss was immune, and then, you know, just something a little different, something to give a little bit of storyline, incorporate those wonderful overlays of what the ancestor said he used them for, and then actually incorporate them into the boss. So, have the boss maybe show up in apprentice level, just harass you a little bit, then leave. And once again, not a lot of HP, just knock off maybe like 20-30, because if you meet the Brigand Pounder, you don't know what that does, you could get almost party wiped in the hallway. Not really necessarily advocating for that. Just saying, just enough to get a taste of it, and then back them out. Veteran level, a nice medium fetch quest kinda, but and if you're worried about making them too short with RNG, just make them a designed layout dungeon for a level of certain hardness. I don't think dungeons always need to be randomly generated, so that's all I'm going to say about that. I've talked a lot about this topic. I think the bosses were a little weak with the repetitiveness, but I do believe most of the bosses were designed fairly well in their attacks and their looks. Number 2, the grind. I get it, it's the style of game. If you say you don't like, you know, to go into many dungeons, get a lot of loot and stuff, that you shouldn't be playing this game. I partially agree with that. I think you could have had a very similar Darkest Dungeon experience, but really shaved off, I don't know, 10, 20 hours, maybe even more, depending on how new you are to the game and how little you refuse to look up stuff. Because you can honestly only stack so much gold, which makes sense. You know, these people are and aren't superhuman. I mean, they do get stabbed, butchered, shot by cannonballs, I mean, on a daily basis. Well, I guess it is weeks, you do go by weeks, so they get 7 days to rest, that's not bad. But still, I mean, if you got shot by bullets, stabbed, hit by a cannonball, and then one week later you're asked to go back out there, probably not going to happen. So let's just throw the realism argument semi out the window here. Then you can only stack, I think it's the stacking. Not that I maybe advocate for unlimited, but can we double everything? Can we double how many portraits you can take, how many busts you can take, how many crests? I mean, it gets to the point where you just are throwing away loot, and you're 3/4 through the dungeon sometimes. You're like, well, this is freaking fun. Because I get it, then you have to go, well, do you choose supplies or do you choose money? And I get that, I really do. And you could still run into that issue, because in long dungeons, trust me, Near the half end of that, you're usually throwing away loot all the time. So if you were to do a long dungeon, you'd still be contemplating, I got about 5 rooms left. Do I get rid of my holy waters and blight cures? You might be still making that decision. Now, maybe in a medium and easy you never would, and maybe you would say that makes it easier because not many people go into longs. I just really think just stockpiling money a little quicker and also getting more heirlooms would be good. You would maybe then argue the Antiquarium would then become irrelevant. I would argue no, because the Antiquarium can still get her those little tokens and the other things. So if you stack 10 tokens and 2 of the little statues, you're still coming out with like an extra 5 to 6 grand. That's 5 to 6 grand you wouldn't have had. That's still very, very good. And if you do that in short dungeons, you don't get a lot of money in short dungeons. But if you were to pick up, 3 to 4 grand, it still makes it up. So I think the Antiquarium would still have a great spot, still be useful, but let's just reduce the grinding a little bit there, just so you can upgrade your town quicker. And speaking about the town, is where my next issue will come in. The Sanitarium. I'm going to combine these two together. I was debating on splitting them up, but they're kind of the same issue. I dislike the fact that if you come out with 0 stress, you can still get a negative quirk. And once again, if you're diehard at the game, you'll say, well, it's the darkest dungeon, you go in there, you fight horrific things, of course you're going to get maybe a negative quirk. I get that. But I literally mean when you play the game to perfection, no one in your party has a single point of stress, and you can get, potentially, statistically very hard, but you can get 4 negative quirks. I find that a little funny. Because I believe it's just a base chance of 25% then times your stress if you succeed the dungeon. I think if you have 0 stress, or even below 5, it negates the chance. Now if you have 6 stress, okay, let's roll in 25%. You didn't do it perfect, so we're going to give you a very small chance to get a negative quirk, but we're still going to give you that chance because you walked out with stress on. I think that would make sense. I just think it's kind of weird to get punished for playing the game literally as perfect as you can and then come out with 3 negative quirks. I just don't think it's very fair. It eats up so much time because then you have to stick them into the Sanitarium, where guess what? You get 3 spots. That's right. 3 spots. So I would change it to 0 negative quirk chance, 5 stress and below. Honestly, the amount of times that would come into play in the early game, if you're new, almost never. I mean, like, walking out with almost 0 stress on all 4 heroes when you're new to the game, probably not going to happen. That's definitely going to maybe be a veteran or even champion late game, where you're just trying to essentially do dungeons, get to the final bosses, and then also to obviously get enough stuff to upgrade your town. So I don't think that would greatly break the game. It's not like you are technically gaining money and people because you're not wasting them in the Sanitarium, but I really believe the Sanitarium should be there to help you when you're bad and not just be there because it's inevitable you're always going to be getting quirks no matter how good you are at the game. Number 4, heroes going away for weeks. This is kind of a weird side rant, and sometimes it comes up not very often, but when it does, it may not even matter too much. But once again, I think it's more of a time waste thing. Certain stress facilities will make your heroes disappear for, I think, well, obviously when you go into that dungeon for a week, and then they can be also gone for that dungeon for a week, so that's already 2 weeks. And I do believe some events cause them to be gone for 2 weeks, so you lose that hero for 3 weeks. I think already having your favorite hero gone for 1 week it's pretty good. Now once again, you could argue, well, that's the point of Darkest Dungeon, you have to use minimal resources to do things, and it puts you, I get that. I just think, once again, it just elongates the grind. You just go, oh, I really need this hero for this dungeon, so let me pop into another 2 dungeons just so I can have this 1 hero back. So you could argue, diversify your people more, plan for that. I get that. When you become a veteran of this game, a lot of these points, not that they still don't exist, but you know of them, you can get around them. But I think for the casual player, it wouldn't have made the game super easier. I'm not asking the game to hand walk you through. I'm just asking the game, hey, if you're going to beat the crap out of me, just at least give me, so I don't have to spend 30 hours of my personal life just doing the same thing over and over again to get back to where I were. Beat the crap out of me, reduce that time in half. I still need to learn to play the game. Even if I do get my hero back a week later, if he dies, he dies. Like, if I'm bad at the game, getting him back a week later really doesn't solve anything. All it does is not make me have to go do 2 more dungeons I don't really care to do. So, it's a weird one, but and it kind of goes with slightly the anti-grind one, but I am going to focus on the stress curios here. they can keep all their other ones where you get like negative accuracy or slower speed or more positive stuff. You know, that stuff's fun. You know, it's kind of cool to see what your hero can come out with on a weekly basis. But man, the ones that take your heroes away for a week, let's not. And finally, the last thing I would have changed with all of Darkest Dungeon was to add another viable healer, or at least give someone else an AoE heal. The reason why I say this is the Vestal becomes almost, when you're new to the game, the Vestal becomes almost a necessity. And maybe that's why the designers added, because you know what, they knew they made a hard game. They knew that if you're new to the game, you're not going to be killing people as efficiently as you can, how to handle enemies, knocking them, stunning them, or just straight out outspeeding and killing them before they act. I get that, there's ways around that. But I really think it's either Vestal or bust in the heals department, and come late game for certain bosses, it's a mandatory character almost, which is super annoying because it limits your party compositions, and it just gets boring. You have like 3 to 4 Vestals laying around, and all you really use them for is obviously just to remove physical damage, which is very important. But I really would have loved to see just one more individual, just maybe not even something as great as Divine Comfort, but something in the same realm of it. So you know what, you use them maybe as a support style first, or even like a mediocre damage. But in that little situation, you go, you know what, oh, I'm going to pop an AoE heal here. Oh, we're done. Okay. I think it would have just made the game a little more dynamic, allowed for a lot more party compositions, because trust me, Vestals get boring. Third row Vestal, Ray of Light, Judgment, Divine Comfort, Divine Word, I can't remember what the last, Divine Grace, there we go, Divine Grace and Divine Comfort. It gets boring, quite frankly. I mean, the stun's not bad on her, but you just sit there heal botting the whole time as you get smashed in the face, because sometimes you may not have enough damage. And then if you play the game super safe, and I think this department's it's not nearly as bad, stress heal department. There's a lot of characters who can stress heal, and there's many ways to stress heal, which I like as well. And there are other ways to heal outside of combat, but we're talking about inside of combat. And when you're inside of combat, you can't eat food. So maybe you could change that. You say, oh, I can eat food. And you go, well, you'll never be on death's door then. Well, you are eating the only thing that allows you to walk throughout the dungeon without taking, isn't it, stress and HP damage? So in one fight, if you eat 6 of your food out of the 12 and you're only halfway through the dungeon, guess what, buddy? 1 food check, and then you're screwed for another food check, and then you have 2 food left as well for another fight. So I don't think it's necessarily a bail. Or if you want, you can make food only give you 1 HP point. You go, well, that's all you need. That is true, and it is kind of funny to think you can just eat some food mid-fight and get HP back. But in reality, your character can take a holy water, a laudanum, medicinal herbs, use a torch, and what else? I mean, they can at least do all of that in their same turn, so to say, and then still act. So imagine this. Oh, you can use a bandage and a blight, right? So you're chugging a holy water, then you're chugging a blight, you're putting medicinal herbs onto your bandage and then bandage yourselves. You're then lighting a torch and then finishing off laudanum. You see what I mean? It gets a little ridiculous to think about what you can do, and in the middle of there, you can't be snacking on a piece of bread or something. So, once again, maybe it's not the best idea, but it is something just to make the Vestal not completely reliable, and you can actually go more just pure damage compositions and make the game just more interesting for yourself from the get-go, rather than learning and playing on that knife's edge for the longest of time until it becomes natural. I know some of these in here you might be thinking, well, you're just trying to make it easier for new people, you can do all of this easily. And I agree, I do all of these things fairly well. The ones where they're grind heavy, I mean, some of that comes down to RNG and it's just annoying, which is why I would have loved to see it change. A game is not hard if you just have to grind for it. It just means you have to grind for it. If I know how to beat a dungeon 12 times in a row and I never fall, I still got to do the dungeons 12 times, and it gets super annoying because in reality, if they change some things, you could do it in 8. Because if you're gonna, I mean, you're occasionally gonna get a dungeon that does screw you and the quantity you face because of just certain elements. But once again, I don't think that necessarily makes a game harder. You don't need many weeks to realize you're bad at this game. You don't get to week 35 and go, oh, I'm bad at this game. Probably within the first 15-20 weeks, you acknowledge you don't know what's going on. Because I mean, my first 15 to 20 weeks, I was like, what is happening? I mean, I'm losing heroes left and right. I don't know how to handle distress comps well. I mean, it was pretty prevalent within the first 15 to 20 weeks, what I keep saying, that I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't get to week 40 and be like, oh, wow, this game's really hard, I finally lost a hero. No, I mean, they were dropping like flies before then. And even if you do reduce some of the stuff, you still gotta do the dungeon. I didn't say increase the resolve so you only have to do one dungeon with one hero. You still gotta go do the resolves amount. And maybe with the looting change, you would actually want to give just a little bit more resolve, because you might be stockpiling on all these heirlooms and gold and then realize, I have everything upgraded by the time people are veteran. And, you know, that would be a problem, because once you get the champion, what's the point of all the busts, the heirlooms? You know, there is no point to them. They would be useless. So you would maybe have to just a small increase, maybe 1 point to every one. You go, just one resolve point. Trust me, that'd actually add up. I mean, if you would go on eight runs with this person, they would have 8 extra resolve. I mean, that could easily almost finish them for the from veteran to champion. So I think just literally an extra point of resolve in each dungeon would boost it up maybe by a dungeon or two's worth for each person. So you figured a dungeon or two is each person. Average dungeons maybe 15-20 minutes depending on which dungeon style you pick. Hey, that saves half an hour per person. So you figured, you know what, that's pretty good. It doesn't make the game a lot easier, but it saves you just that little extra time. Thanks for watching. Let me know where you disagree. I'm sure some people with a traditional style of this game, and when you got very good at it, you want people not to suffer, but you want people to go through the same stress as you. I still think this game would have been extremely difficult. It still would have had all of its darkest dungeon flair to it if you would have just removed some of those aspects and also allowed people to experiment with compositions a little more. Thank you for watching.